By sunrise, Ethan Walker was no longer my best friend, and the most terrifying part was that I was no longer sure I wanted him to be. I woke to the pale blue light of dawn pressing through the thin walls of the tent, soft and cold, turning everything around me into shadows stitched with silver. For a moment, I did not know where I was. The air smelled like wet pine, lake fog, dying campfire smoke, and Ethan. Mostly Ethan. His cedar and rain scent clung to the heavy jacket wrapped around my shoulders, tucked so carefully beneath my chin that it felt less like something I had borrowed and more like something he had given me without asking for it back. My fingers tightened around the fabric before I understood what I was doing. The last thing I remembered clearly was the storm, the wind snapping through the trees like the whole mountain was breathing too hard, my body shaking from cold and panic, and Ethan kneeling in front of me with both hands open, asking in a voice lower than thunder, "Noah, can I come closer?" After that, everything became fragments. His hand hovering near mine, but never touching until I nodded. His coat settling around my shoulders. His heartbeat steady beneath my ear when I finally stopped pretending I could hold myself together. And then one sentence, whispered so quietly I almost convinced myself I had dreamed it. "You think this started tonight?" I sat up too fast, and the world tilted. The sleeping bag rustled around my legs. My backpack was beside me, my boots placed neatly near the entrance, my damp hoodie hanging from a small hook Ethan must have tied to the tent pole. He had taken care of everything while I slept. Of course he had. Ethan had always been like that. The kind of alpha who noticed a loose shoelace before you tripped, who moved to the outside of the sidewalk without thinking, who remembered that I hated black coffee, but liked the smell of it in the morning. For 6 years, I had called that friendship because calling it anything else would have ruined the only safe place I had ever known. The tent flap was half open. Beyond it, the world looked washed clean. Mist drifted across the lake in slow white ribbons, curling over the water like breath against glass. The campsite sat quiet beneath towering evergreens, every branch dripping from last night's rain. Ethan was sitting on a flat rock near the shore, his elbows resting on his knees, his dark hair still damp, his broad shoulders hunched like he was carrying something heavier than exhaustion. He was not looking at the sunrise. He was looking at his hands. That was when fear slipped under my ribs. Ethan Walker did not shake. He did not hesitate. He was the calm one, the steady one, the person everyone trusted when plans fell apart. But his right hand trembled once, just once, before he closed it into a fist. I touched my own wrist and felt the lingering warmth there, faint but impossible to ignore, as if my skin remembered his fingers even though my mind did not fully dare to. Outside, Ethan turned slightly, as if he sensed I was awake before I made a sound. Our eyes met through the opening of the tent, and the look on his face stole every word from my mouth. It was not regret. It was not anger. It was recognition, deep and startled and almost afraid. Yesterday, we had driven 3 hours out of the city for a normal weekend camping trip between best friends. By morning, the mountain had given us back as strangers who knew each other too well. 24 hours earlier, I was standing in the parking garage beneath my apartment building with a duffel bag at my feet and a lie sitting heavy behind my teeth. Ethan leaned against his dark blue pickup truck, sunlight cutting across his white t-shirt and the open flannel he always wore when he wanted to look casual, but somehow still looked like he belonged on the cover of an outdoor magazine. He smiled when he saw me, that easy, crooked smile that had been ruining my common sense since sophomore year of college. "You pack like you are moving into the forest," he said, reaching for my bag before I could stop him. I told him I liked being prepared. What I did not tell him was that half the bag was filled with things I did not need. Extra hoodies, scent blockers, emergency suppressants, and a paperback novel I had already read twice, all because I was terrified of having nothing to do with my hands when sitting beside him in the quiet. Ethan tossed my bag into the truck bed like it weighed nothing, then opened the passenger door for me the way he always did. He never made a big deal out of those small gestures. That was the problem. If he had been obviously charming, obviously flirtatious, obviously aware of the way my heart stumbled whenever his fingers brushed mine, I could have protected myself. But Ethan was kind in the worst possible way, naturally and without expectation, like caring for me was as simple as breathing. The drive out of the city took almost 3 hours. We left behind the traffic, the coffee shops, the office towers, and the crowded sidewalks until the road narrowed into a two-lane ribbon winding through miles of pine forest. Ethan kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting near the gearshift, close enough that I noticed every movement. He let me control the playlist, handed me a bottle of water before I realized I was thirsty, and stopped at a gas station outside Ashford because he remembered I liked the cinnamon rolls there, even though I had only mentioned it once 2 years ago. I should have been happy. Any other Omega would have felt lucky to be loved by a friend that gently. I just felt foolish because this trip was supposed to help him heal from someone else. 3 days earlier, Ethan had called me after midnight and said he had ended things with Caleb. His voice had been calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm people use when they are standing too close to the edge of something painful. I had listened. I had said all the right things. I had told him he deserved someone who saw him clearly. And the entire time, I had hated myself for the quiet, shameful spark of hope that opened in my chest. Now we were driving towards Silver Lake Campground, 40 miles from the nearest decent cell service, and I kept telling myself I was here as his best friend. Nothing more. When we reached the campsite, the late afternoon sun had turned gold across the water, and the mountains rose behind the lake like sleeping giants. Ethan stepped out of the truck, inhaled deeply, and looked lighter for the first time in weeks. "This is exactly what I needed," he said. Then he turned to me, softer. "Thank you for coming, Noah." I smiled back and hoped he could not hear everything I was too afraid to say. Setting up camp should have been ordinary, but Ethan had a way of turning ordinary things into evidence I did not know how to ignore. He chose the flattest patch of ground without asking, the one tucked beneath two tall pines where the wind broke around the trunks instead of cutting straight through. He said it was because the view of the lake was better from there, but then he moved my tent 3 feet to the left so the morning sun would not hit me directly in the eyes. He hammered the stakes into the soil with careful, practiced force while I unrolled the sleeping pads and tried not to stare at the line of his shoulders beneath his flannel. The air was cool, maybe 58 degrees, and every breeze carried the clean smell of pine needles, lake water, and smoke from another campsite somewhere down the trail. It should have calmed me. Instead, it made everything sharper. Every sound seemed closer. The snap of tent poles, the soft crunch of Ethan's boots over dry needles, the distant call of a bird over the water. Ethan moved around me as if he had memorized my weak spots. When I reached for the heavy cooler, he touched the handle first and said, "I have got it." When I tried to gather firewood from a slope slick with moss, he stepped ahead of me and offered his hand without looking back, trusting I would take it. I did, because I always did. His palm was warm, steady, and calloused from years of weekend hikes and fixing things he did not need to fix. He pulled me up easily, then released me the moment my feet were stable, as if he had trained himself never to hold on too long. That was Ethan, careful enough to save me, distant enough to keep me confused. By the time the tents were up and the fire ring was cleared, the sun had begun sinking behind the mountains, pouring amber light across the lake. Ethan opened the truck bed and handed me my gray hoodie before I even felt the chill. "You always get cold when the sun drops," he said. I forced a laugh and pulled it on. "You make me sound predictable." He looked at me for one quiet second too long. "You are not predictable, Noah. I just pay attention." The words landed softly, but they still knocked the breath out of me. I turned away first, pretending to check the camp stove, because there were only so many times a person could mistake attention for affection before it started to feel like self-harm. Later, while Ethan built the fire, I walked down to the lake to rinse dirt from my hands. The water was cold enough to sting, clear over smooth stones, reflecting the pink sky in broken pieces. I crouched at the shore, breathing slowly, trying to settle the restless pull beneath my skin. My scent blockers were working. My pulse was not. Behind me, Ethan stopped moving. I did not hear a footstep, a cough, or the scrape of wood. Just silence, sudden and complete. When I looked back, he was standing near the fire pit with a bundle of kindling in one hand, staring at me as if he had forgotten what he was doing. The wind shifted between us, gentle but unmistakable, carrying lake mist toward the trees and carrying me toward him. Something changed in his expression. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw it because I had spent 6 years learning every version of his face. His eyes darkened. His shoulders went still. The air around him seemed to tighten, not dangerous, not angry, but focused in a way that made my heart beat hard against my ribs. "What?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. Ethan blinked once, as if waking from a thought he did not mean to have. Then he looked down at the kindling in his hand and shook his head. "Nothing," he said. But when he turned back to the fire, he moved more slowly, and for the first time that day, I wondered if I was not the only one pretending. The fire came alive slowly, one careful breath at a time, until orange light curled around the logs and painted Ethan's face in warm shadows. He sat across from me on a folding chair, sleeves pushed to his elbows, turning foil packets of potatoes and chicken over the grate like this was any normal evening, and not the first time I had ever seen him look at me like a question he was afraid to ask. I kept my hands wrapped around a tin mug of hot cider, letting the heat sting my palms, because it gave me something to focus on besides the silence between us. Ethan was usually easy to talk to. We had filled years with late-night phone calls, bad movie marathons, arguments over takeout, shared grocery runs, airport pickups, emergency furniture assembly, and the kind of ordinary loyalty people spend their lives hoping to find. But out here, with no traffic hum, no neighbors through thin apartment walls, no phone signal strong enough to rescue us, every familiar thing felt stripped bare. He looked up from the fire and asked, "Are you doing okay?" I almost laughed, because that was such an Ethan question. Simple, gentle, dangerous. "I am fine," I said, and hated how quickly the lie came out. His eyes moved over my face, not invasive, just too observant. "You have been quiet since the lake. Maybe I am just enjoying nature." Noah. One word, and somehow it carried 6 years of knowing me too well. I looked down into my cider. The steam blurred my vision for a second, or maybe I was grateful for the excuse. "You are the one who needed this trip," I said. "Not me." Ethan leaned back, his chair creaking softly beneath him. Across the campsite, the lake reflected the last bruised purple of evening. "I thought I did," he said. "After Caleb, I thought I needed distance. Clean air. No one asking questions." My fingers tightened around the mug. There it was, the name I had been waiting for and dreading since we left the city. Caleb had been tall, charming, confident, the kind of beta who knew exactly how good he looked beside an alpha like Ethan. I had met him twice and smiled both times until my cheeks ached. "I am sorry," I said, because I was, even if the truth inside me was uglier and more complicated. Ethan shook his head. "Do not be." He was not wrong to leave. That made me look up. "What does that mean?" Ethan stared into the fire for a long time. A spark lifted between us, bright for half a second before vanishing into the dark. He said I was already committed. To someone else. My heart made one hard, painful sound inside my chest. I forced my voice to stay light. "Were you?" Ethan's gaze flicked to mine, and for a moment the air felt as thin as the mountain ridge above us. I told him no. He paused. I thought I was telling the truth. The words settled around us with the weight of falling snow. I should have asked what he meant. I should have laughed it off, changed the subject, thrown another log on the fire, done anything except sit there with my omega instincts waking beneath my skin like small frightened birds. Before I could speak, a cold gust moved through the campsite. The flame bent sideways. My scent blocker patch prickled under my sleeve, and I pressed my wrist against my thigh, hoping Ethan would not notice. Of course he did. His eyes dropped for half a second, then returned to my face with a softness that hurt more than ignorance ever could. "Do you need your stabilizer?" he asked. The world went quiet. Not because of the forest. Not because of the lake. Because Ethan had said it like he already knew. My mouth went dry. "How do you know about that?" He reached slowly toward the side pocket of his hiking bag, then stopped before touching it, as if even the movement needed my permission. His voice was low and careful. "Because you always forget to pack the backup when you are nervous." I stared at him, unable to breathe. The fire cracked between us, bright and small and merciless. For 6 years, I thought I had hidden every difficult part of myself from him. But Ethan Walker had been carrying a spare piece of my safety through the woods all along. I could not look at the hiking bag after that. It sat beside Ethan's chair like a quiet confession, half in shadow, half in firelight, carrying something he had no reason to bring unless he had been watching me much more closely than I ever allowed myself to believe. My first instinct was embarrassment, hot and sharp. Not because being an omega was something shameful, but because I had spent years building a version of myself that looked easy to love from a safe distance. Noah who was calm. Noah who needed nothing. Noah who smiled through crowded rooms when alpha pheromones made his head ache. Noah who said he was fine so often that people stopped checking. Ethan had never stopped. I set my mug down on the ground before my hands could shake hard enough to spill it. How long? I asked. My voice sounded small against the open dark, nearly swallowed by the lake and the wind. Ethan did not pretend to misunderstand. He rubbed both hands over his face once, then leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Since the winter formal in college, he said. The answer moved through me slowly, opening doors I had locked from the inside. The winter formal. A crowded ballroom, cheap white lights strung across the ceiling, too much cologne, too many alphas showing off, and me outside behind the student center, breathing into my scarf while snow collected in my hair. Ethan had found me there with 2 paper cups of hot chocolate and had not asked why I was shaking. He had only stood beside me, blocking the wind with his body, telling me a ridiculous story about his roommate burning macaroni in the dorm microwave until I could laugh again. I had thought he was being kind. I had not known he was learning me. You knew I was using blockers? I asked. I guessed at first, he said. Then I noticed the patterns. How you always picked the seat near an exit. How you left parties right before the room got too loud. How you carried your jacket even in July because the sleeve covered your wrist. He looked at me then, and the firelight made his eyes look almost gold. I did not want you to feel exposed, so I never said anything. I swallowed, but the ache in my throat only grew. So you just packed medicine for me without telling me? Stabilizer, he corrected softly. Not because I thought you were weak. Because you are always prepared for everyone else, and I wanted someone to be prepared for you. The words hit harder than they should have. I stood too quickly, needing space, needing air, needing the safety of distance before my face gave away everything. The forest tilted around me for one dizzy second. Ethan rose at once but stayed on his side of the fire, hands loose, shoulders tense with restraint. Noah, he said, not commanding, not chasing, just there, always there. I walked 10 feet toward the lake before stopping. The cold had deepened, silvering the grass and turning my breath pale. Behind me, Ethan did not move closer. That was almost worse. He knew exactly how to make himself safe, and I hated how badly I wanted to step back into that safety. You should have told me, I said. Maybe, he answered. But you were so determined to be okay. I did not want to take that from you. I turned around. And Caleb? Did he know too? Ethan's expression changed, just enough to tell me the answer before he spoke. He noticed you before he noticed anything else about us. My heart twisted. Us. Ethan's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked truly uncertain. He said I looked for you in every room before I looked at him. The lake behind me was black glass. The fire behind him burned low and restless. I wanted to deny it for both of us, to protect the shape of our friendship, but the truth had already stepped out of the dark and sat down between us. Ethan reached into his bag, took out the small, unopened stabilizer packet, and held it out across the firelight without crossing the space himself. You do not have to take it from me, he said. I can set it down. My feet moved before pride could stop them. I came back slowly, one step, then another, until I was close enough to take the packet from his hand. Our fingers did not touch. Somehow, that restraint felt louder than contact. Thank you, I whispered. Ethan's eyes lowered to my wrist, then back to my face. Always, he said, and the word was so gentle it nearly broke me. The stabilizer packet felt smaller than it should have, almost weightless in my palm, but somehow it changed the gravity of the entire campsite. I pressed it against the inside of my wrist beneath my sleeve, breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth the way the clinic brochures always said to do. Usually, the effect came quietly, like a curtain being drawn between me and the world. That night, it barely softened the edges. The air had shifted too much. Ethan had shifted too much. Every part of me was aware of him across the fire. Sitting still with his hands clasped between his knees, his scent held carefully back as if even his instincts were afraid of crowding me. Cedar, rain, and something warmer underneath. Something that felt like home before I had permission to call it that. It is not working fast enough, he said softly. I looked up. You can tell. I can tell you are trying not to scare me. That almost made me laugh, except my chest hurt too badly. You are the alpha. I am pretty sure I am supposed to be the one who gets scared. Ethan's expression tightened, not with offense, but with sadness. Not with me. The simplicity of it undid me more than any grand speech could have. I turned toward the lake again, blinking hard, because the forest was becoming too bright and too dark at the same time. My skin felt too sensitive beneath my hoodie, not in a dangerous way, not in a way I could not name, but like every nerve had become a small bell and the whole mountain was ringing. The wind rolled down from the ridge, colder now, carrying the first scent of rain. Above us, clouds gathered over the black outline of the trees, swallowing the stars one by one. Ethan followed my gaze. Storm is coming in faster than the forecast said. We should put the food away, I said, grateful for a task, any task. We moved carefully around each other, packing the cooler, sealing the trash bag, folding the camp chairs. The normal motions helped for a few minutes. Then the first gust hit hard enough to scatter ash across the fire ring. Ethan stepped in front of me on instinct, blocking the sparks before they reached my hoodie. He did not touch me. He just became a wall between me and the wind. The restraint in that one movement made my throat burn. Rain began as a whisper through the pine needles, then a steady patter, then a sudden drumming roar. Within minutes, the campsite blurred behind sheets of water. Ethan killed the fire completely, checked the stakes on both tents, and shouted over the rain that we should get inside before the ground turned slick. I nodded and ducked into my tent, but the moment I zipped the flap, the small space closed around me like a held breath. The fabric snapped in. The wind. Rain hammered inches from my face. My scent blocker patch prickled again, then burned with a weak, failing warmth. I pressed my wrist against my chest, but it was too late. Panic opened inside me, quiet at first, then fast. Not because I wanted anything, because I needed safety, and my body knew exactly who safety smelled like. Noah. Ethan's voice came from outside, close but careful. Talk to me. I tried to answer. All that came out was a broken breath. The tent shook as another gust hit, and one of the side poles bent with a sharp metallic groan. A seam near the corner gave way. Cold rain sprayed across my sleeping bag, my backpack, my hands. I scrambled backward, heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. Noah, I am opening the flap, Ethan said. I will not come in unless you say yes. I squeezed my eyes shut. Pride begged me to stay silent. Fear said run. But the part of me that had trusted him for 6 years answered first. Yes, I whispered. The zipper moved slowly. Ethan crouched outside in the rain, soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes locked on mine with unbearable focus. He saw the broken pole, the wet floor, my shaking hands, and still he did not rush me. Can you stand? He asked. I nodded, though I was not sure. He held out his hand, palm up, giving me the choice. Thunder rolled over the lake, deep and endless. I placed my hand in his, and the moment his fingers closed around mine, the storm outside became quieter than the one inside my chest. Ethan led me through the rain with one hand wrapped around mine, and the other, holding the broken tent flap away from my face. The distance between my tent and his could not have been more than 15 feet, but it felt like crossing an entire life. Water ran down my neck, soaked through my hoodie, and turned the ground beneath my boots soft and unstable. Ethan moved slowly, matching my pace instead of pulling me forward, even though the storm was beating against his back and turning his flannel dark against his skin. When we reached his tent, he opened the flap and stepped aside first. You go in, he said over the rain. I will grab your bag after you. Are settled. The carefulness of it almost made me cry. Even now, even with my hand still caught in his, even with my scent slipping past every defense I had left, he was giving me space like it was something sacred. I crawled inside and found that his tent was warmer, larger, steadier, anchored beneath the deeper shelter of the pines. His sleeping bag was already unrolled on one side, his lantern hanging low from the center loop, casting a dim golden circle across the floor. Everything smelled like him. Clean cedar, rain on stone, the quiet comfort of a house with the porch light left on. I sat near the far wall, hugging my knees, while Ethan disappeared back into the storm. He returned less than a minute later carrying my duffel bag, my boots, and the damp hoodie I had dropped in my panic. He placed everything near the entrance, then stayed crouched by the flap, water dripping from his hair onto the tent floor. I am going to zip this closed, he said. Is that okay? I nodded. The zipper sealed us in, and the sound felt impossibly loud. For a moment, neither of us moved. Rain hammered above us. Thunder rolled farther away now, low over the lake, as if the worst of the storm had passed, but its echo refused to leave. Ethan took off his soaked flannel and set it near the entrance, then reached for a dry sweatshirt from his pack. He did not look at me while he changed layers. He moved with the deliberate modesty of someone trying to make himself smaller than he was. That broke something in me. "Stop," I whispered. He froze immediately. "Stop what?" I looked at him through the lantern light. At the Alpha, I had trusted with every harmless part of myself, while hiding the parts that mattered most. "Stop being so careful," I said, my voice trembling. "Please. I cannot survive you being this kind to me tonight." Ethan lowered himself onto the opposite side of the tent, keeping the space between us clear. His expression was calm, but his eyes were not. His eyes looked like the lake before lightning. "I am being careful because you matter," he said. "That is the part that hurts." The confession escaped before I could catch it. Once it was out, the rest followed like rain. Through a torn seam. "You matter too much to me, Ethan. More than you are supposed to. More than a best friend should. And I know this is unfair, because you just ended things with Caleb, and you are confused, and I am overwhelmed, and maybe by morning we will both pretend this was the storm talking. But I cannot keep doing this. I cannot keep standing beside you while you love other people and thanking you for the privilege of being close enough to watch." Ethan did not interrupt. He did not reach for me. He only listened, and somehow that made the truth come out cleaner. "I have loved you for years," I said, barely louder than the rain. "And I hate that I am telling you now, when everything feels too intense to trust." The silence after that was enormous. Ethan looked down at his hands, then back at me, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with something deeper than shock. "Noah," he said, "you think this started tonight?" Ethan's question stayed between us, quiet and devastating, while the rain softened above the tent like the mountain itself was leaning in to listen. I could only stare at him, because my mind had prepared for rejection, pity, distance, even the gentle kindness of someone trying not to hurt me more than necessary. It had not prepared for the possibility that he was looking back across the same years from the other side. Ethan drew in a slow breath and lowered his eyes, not because he was hiding, but because whatever he was about to say seemed too heavy to carry while looking straight at me. "Caleb did not leave because I was careless," he said. "He left because he was honest before I was." My throat tightened. "What does that mean?" Ethan gave a small, humorless smile that disappeared almost as soon as it came. "It means he noticed that I checked my phone every time you had a late shift. He noticed that I canceled dinner once because you texted me one word, just my name, and I knew something was wrong. He noticed that when we walked into any room, I found you first, even if you were not there." Thunder murmured far beyond the trees, lower now, almost gentle. Ethan looked at me then, and the restraint in his face had cracked. Enough for me to see the ache underneath. I told myself that was friendship. I told myself you were my person in the safe, ordinary way people say that about someone they trust. But Caleb asked me one night what would happen if you called, and said you needed me while he was standing right in front of me. His hands opened slowly on his knees. I did not answer fast enough. My breath caught. The tent felt too small for the silence that followed. Ethan continued, voice rough but steady. He said I was not cruel, but I was unfair. He said part of me had already chosen someone, and I was too afraid to name it because naming it would mean risking the only relationship I had never wanted to lose. My eyes burned. I wanted to be angry at him for not telling me sooner, but the truth was sitting inside my own chest like a mirror. We had both protected the friendship by starving it of honesty. Ethan shifted slightly closer, then stopped, leaving the final distance untouched. "I loved you before I understood what it was," he said. "I loved you when you fell asleep during movie night with your glasses crooked and pretended you had only rested your eyes. I loved you when you mailed my mother a birthday card after meeting her once, because you remembered she said no one wrote letters anymore. I loved you when you laughed at yourself first so no one else could hurt you with it. And I hated that I kept calling it loyalty because loyalty was easier to survive." Something in me broke open, not painfully, but like a locked window finally giving way to air. I pressed both hands against my chest as if I could keep my heart from moving too fast. "Ethan," I whispered. He shook his head, gentle but firm. "You do not have to answer me tonight. You do not have to decide anything because of the storm, or the blockers, or the fact that we are alone out here. I need you to hear that clearly. I am not asking for anything from you." The tears slipped before I could stop them. Ethan saw, and every line of his body pulled toward me, but he still did not move. That was what undid me completely. Not the confession. Not the years. The waiting. The way he gave me power even when his whole heart was in his eyes. "I am scared," I admitted. "So am I," he said. "But I am more scared of going back to pretending." Outside, the rain thinned into a silver whisper. Inside, the space between us felt less like distance and more like a promise neither of us dared to touch yet. I reached out first, not far, just enough to place my hand palm up on the floor between us. Ethan looked at it like it was something sacred. Then, slowly, carefully, he set his hand beside mine. Close enough for warmth, not close enough to claim. And somehow, that almost touch felt like the truest answer either of us could give. For a long time, neither of us moved. Our hands rested on the tent floor with less than an inch between them, close enough that I could feel the warmth of Ethan through the thin sleeping pad, far enough that the choice still belonged to both of us. The rain faded into a hush above us. Somewhere beyond the trees, water slipped from branches in soft, uneven drops, and the lake answered with tiny ripples against the shore. I had imagined confessing to Ethan 100 different ways over the years. In every version, I either ruined everything or woke up before he could respond. I had never imagined this quiet. I had never imagined him looking at my hand like it was not something to take, but something to be trusted with. "Can I hold it?" he asked. For simple words, and my heart folded around them. I nodded. Ethan moved slowly, giving me time to change my mind, and then his fingers slipped around mine. There was no rush, no claim, no sudden change in the air. Only warmth. Only the steady pressure of his palm, familiar from hiking trails and crowded sidewalks and years of almosts, now carrying a meaning neither of us could pretend away. My breath shook once. Ethan noticed, of course he did, and his thumb stilled immediately. "Too much?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, just real." His face softened in a way I had never seen before, open and frightened and full of hope he was trying not to place on my shoulders. "Then we take real slowly," he said. 1 minute a day. Time. I believed him. That was the dangerous part. I believed Ethan Walker more easily than I believed myself. The cold finally caught up with me then, settling deep beneath my damp sleeves, and I shivered hard enough that he saw it. He released my hand before I could pull away, reached for his dry jacket, and held it open between us. "You are freezing," he said. "You can say no." I almost did, out of habit, out of fear, out of loyalty to the old version of us that had kept me safe because it kept me silent. Instead, I moved closer. Ethan wrapped the jacket around my shoulders, not around my body, leaving space where space mattered, and sat beside me with his back against the tent wall. I leaned only as much as I chose to shoulder, breathing through the ache of being cared for by someone who finally knew what it cost me to accept it. We stayed like that while the storm moved east. We talked in fragments, about college, about Caleb, about all the times one of us had almost said something and swallowed it back. At some point, exhaustion pulled at me. Ethan told me to sleep, and I told him he should stop sounding so responsible. He smiled then, small and real, and the sight of it was the last clear thing I remembered before my eyes closed. When I woke before sunrise, the tent was blue with morning. His jacket was still around me. His scent still lingered like a promise written into the fabric. Ethan was outside by the lake, sitting on the flat rock with his elbows on his knees, staring down at his hands. For one suspended second, I thought maybe he regretted it. Then I looked lower and saw my own wrist glowing faintly beneath the edge of my sleeve, a soft silver warmth pulsing once, then fading into my skin. Not a wound, not a claim, a sign. The kind old Omega story spoke of in whispers, when two people found the truth before they found the courage to name it. Ethan turned as if he felt the same light under his own skin. Our eyes met through the open tent flap, and the whole mountain seemed to hold its breath. He stood slowly, crossed the wet grass, and stopped just outside, close enough for the morning to gather around him. His voice was quiet when he said my name. "Noah," he whispered, looking at me like the world had changed shape overnight. "I think the mountain knew before we did."